Welcome back to Fangirl Football. Let's dive into week 13 of DFS, specifically Sunday of week 13. This is our post-Thanksgiving and Black Friday football break, so now it's a great time to catch up and prepare for Sunday DFS. We have a free DraftKings contest going, shaking it up a bit and doing DraftKings the last couple of contests, and so today I'm largely going to be focusing on DraftKings because of this. Our link for that free contest is in the description, and we'd love to have you join us. Judy is traveling back from Detroit after getting to catch the amazing Lions-Bears game on Thanksgiving. So it's just me this week with a little offline input from Judy and Quentin. You might notice a little change since it's just me. I'll be sitting and knitting and chatting football, and then we will build our lineup. So let's kick it off with the game and game reviews. There's 10 games this Sunday afternoon slate. We have the LA Chargers at Atlanta. The over-under is 47.5. We do have a couple of injuries there. J.K. Dobbins is out with a knee injury, and Hayden Hurst, the Chargers tight end, is also out / now on IR. I'd missed that he had gone on IR. Atlanta has been hit or miss on offense this year. Some weeks they click, others they struggle. So some option stacks here I see would be Herbert, McConkey, London. Herbert's going for 5,600 on DraftKings, McConkey's 6,100, and London is 6,500. Bijan is up at 7,300. He hasn't had high fantasy point totals the last couple of games or much of the season, to the dismay of people who drafted him in their fantasy leagues. But Los Angeles has allowed 140 scrimmage yards to both Chase Brown and Derrick Henry in the last two games, so this could be Bijan's game. I'd put a word of caution in. Quentin Johnston, he is listed at 5K. Last week, Johnston dropped 3 passes and finished with 0 catches. That could definitely lead to a lot less this year, so I don't think he is really worth that 5K. But you do have Disley, who has taken the top tight end role for the Chargers at 4K. He's seen fewer targets per route, but overall he is a really solid tight end option. Another good wide receiver option here is Mooney. This is likely going to be a back and forth, and the Chargers have been allowing points against them. And so if the back and forth competitiveness gets going, we're going to see Kirk Cousins has to throw to someone. It's likely going to be London. London fares better against the type of defenses that the Chargers like to run, but Mooney is another option. I definitely say skip Kyle Pitts as your tight end. At 4,600, there's cheaper and higher performing options that we'll talk about. Let's go on to Houston at Jacksonville. Trevor Lawrence has been injured and is questionable, but trending towards playing. Jacksonville's been allowing the second highest yards per attempt and one of the lowest pressure rates since week 7. So they're not putting a lot of pressure on the opposing team, and they're allowing them to run and pass a ton. Houston's been giving up points on the run more than the pass. And so you do have CJ Stroud. Last time CJ Stroud faced Jacksonville earlier this season, he put up a season high of 345 pass yards and 23.5 fantasy points. He's sitting at 6,400. Then you have Nico Collins, Joe Mixon, Tank Dell. All of them should have good days. I think one or two of these is definitely a must-have in a lineup. This should be a really good game for Houston. I don't really want to make a stack, though. The person that I would think about making a stack from the Jacksonville side would have been Bigsby or ETN, but since both of them are healthy and both of them are likely to play, we don't know who the workload is going to. So I could see picking up pieces from this. Let's chat. The Seahawks are headed to the Jets. Injury-wise, Lockett is questionable with a knee injury. Metcalf, surprisingly, is also questionable with a shoulder injury. And then Breece Hall is actually also questionable on the Jets side with a knee injury. The Jets' defensive line has been good at laying on pressure. The Seahawks' offensive line has had the 3rd worst pressure rate. So, combining these two, we're probably going to see Geno Smith running around behind the line of scrimmage. I would love to not say that, but I could see this being a a good game for Walker, because if they're going to move that ball and Geno's not going to have time to throw it consistently, especially if Metcalf is out and Lockett is out, then they're going to have to rely on Walker and Charbonnet. On the Jets side, you have Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams. I think Devontae Adams isn't worth the price. It's just a really expensive price, and we haven't seen him produce yet for that. We have better options. This is another one where I might look at pieces, but there's also better games that I like more. Let's move on to one of those, being Tennessee at Washington. There is a slew of questionables here, with Tyjae Spears being questionable with a concussion, though he did practice fully on Thursday. Austin Eckler is questionable with a concussion. Noah Brown, questionable. And Brian Robinson Jr., also questionable with an ankle injury. I think this is going to be a good matchup between the two. This is looking like it could be pretty competitive. Well, it is Levis on the Tennessee side, so you're not building a stack around the Tennessee quarterback. The past 4 lead receivers to face the Commanders scored at least 11 PPR points from receptions and receiving yards alone. So it's a good matchup for Calvin Ridley, who we're seeing is priced at $5,700, and potentially Tony Pollard, who that workload, though, is directly tied to Tyjae Spears. So if he's going to be in, this probably isn't the week for him. Plus, he's up at 6,300. On the other side, you could look at Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin. While the Tennessee defense has been able to keep games competitive, this should be a good week for Daniels and McLaurin. But they are pretty expensive. LA Rams at New Orleans. This is probably one of my favorite games for this weekend, because the Rams generally have an above-average offense and a below-average defense, and we've seen some really good weeks from New Orleans as well, especially with Carr back being as quarterback. So there should be a lot of opportunities for both teams to score, and so I see this being a good stack of Stafford, Kupp, and then maybe Hill or Valdez-Scantling, especially with Marquez Valdez-Scantling. He's priced at $4,500. Over the last 2 games, he scored 42.6 fantasy points and had 3 touchdowns. The LA Rams have allowed the 5th most deep passing yards and the 2nd most deep passing touchdowns this season. So this is a perfect setup for Marquez Valdez-Scantling. And especially as you're looking for those cheaper wide receivers, I feel like this is a good spot here. For running backs, you always have Kamara. And is this going to be the week that Kamara is scoring the same that he did when against the Cowboys 2nd or 3rd week of this year? Is he worth it again? Because he's priced at $7,700. You have to make a decision between Cooper Kupp and Nakua. Nakua is priced higher than Kupp. I like going with Kupp over Nakua personally. One of the reasons I kind of argued for this stack is Stafford has his targets back and looks good. There were a couple of weeks where both Kupp and Nakua were out and they struggled a little bit with Williams, and overall the Rams struggled. But with his targets back, he's been doing significantly better. And New Orleans actually has allowed the 10th highest yards per attempt and the 5th most passing yards per game, meaning New Orleans, this is a good matchup for Stafford. Let's chat Philadelphia at Baltimore. Injuries. Devonta Smith is questionable with that hamstring injury. I am not going to cover this one too much. I don't really like this one. I think a lot of the pieces are really expensive, and Philadelphia has allowed the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game. So this one, the only piece I really like in this potentially is Dallas Goedert, the tight end for Philadelphia. If Devonta Smith is really out, this could be a good setup for Dallas Goedert, because he gets more target share when one of the wide receivers is out. and Baltimore gives up yardage to top tight end options. But that's pretty much the only piece I like in this. Let's move on to Arizona at Minnesota. Arizona's been playing well since week 7, allowing the 4th lowest yards per attempt and the fewest passing touchdowns. On the Minnesota side, there are definitely people that I think you could target. You just get pricey. Justin Jefferson, he had very few fantasy points last week, and so if you go by returning to the average, he should have a great game this week. Is that great game going to be worth $8,100, the $8,100 price point or not? Is, I think, the big question. This game does have another tight end I really like, which is TJ Hawkinson. He's projected at the same number of points as McBride, but cheaper by $1,400. So, and he's been tight end 9 in fantasy points per game this season. The only thing is that Arizona has held tight ends to some of the fewest yards per game. So it could be a little more of a difficult matchup for him. Other than that, I don't really see building a stack out of this. I could see this turning into the Minnesota game that we had a couple weeks ago, where we all thought it was going to be a blowout, and I think it was Minnesota at Jacksonville. We all thought it was just going to be Minnesota was going to have a great day and run up the score, kind of like Detroit's been doing occasionally this season. That's not what we saw. I think this similarly could be a very low-scoring game. Continuing on to Pittsburgh at Cincinnati, 44.5. Pittsburgh gets another divisional matchup. We saw how the Baltimore-Pittsburgh game went a couple weeks ago, and then that Pittsburgh-Cleveland game last week. The Pittsburgh defense has been strong, shutting both running and passing options. I don't think we're going to see the same team that we saw in that snowy game. I think that this is going to be more on the lower scoring game, and we're not going to, if you look at the prices for Burrow and Chase, building a stack out of this game is difficult, mostly because pieces are very expensive, and I think that the Pittsburgh defense is going to be shutting them down more than letting them run. On the Pittsburgh side, there's a couple of options. Najee Harris at $6K. Cincinnati is a good matchup for backs. It's also favorable for the Pittsburgh wide receivers. Cincinnati's just been allowing people to score. The defense hasn't really been there. And so George Pickens at 6,800 might be a good option, but I don't see this being a push for driving up score. I see this being much more like the Baltimore-Pittsburgh game we saw just a couple weeks ago. Continuing on to Indy at the New England Patriots. Handful of injuries here, including Josh Downs, Ashton Dulin, and Alec Pierce. All wide receivers for Indianapolis Colts, which are out or questionable. And then on the New England side, Demario Douglas is questionable with an ankle injury. This should be a good matchup for Jonathan Taylor. Patriots aren't shutting down the run as much, and the next worst offensive line is the Seattle Seahawks in terms of run blocking. So if you're going to look at anyone, I think Jonathan Taylor, the running back for the Colts, at 6,900 might make sense. And then you always have to look at Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry should flirt with being tight end 1 this week. With the Indianapolis defense has just been allowing receiving yards per game and the 9th most fantasy points per game to tight ends. So at 4,200, Hunter Henry's a really good option for your tight end slot this week. If you're thinking Michael Pittman Jr. as the wide receiver for Indiana might be a good option. Couple of caution things there. While that 5,200 price tag is nice, New England tends to use man defense at the second highest rate in the NFL. And Pittman produces significantly less under man defense. And then you add in that 3 of the wide receivers are either questionable or out. 2 of them are for sure out. 1 of them's questionable. I'd worry it gets too easy to identify who to cover and ensure Pittman's not going to get the ball or can't get as far with it. I don't see this being the best matchup for Pittman. Let's chat Bucks at Carolina. Carolina has 2 players out. Jatavian Sanders, the tight end, and Jalen Coker are both out. This is going to be a great matchup for the Bucks. I could see the Panthers have allowed the most fantasy points to running backs this season. So I could see this could be a great stack building game where we have Baker Mayfield and Bucky Irving and Cade Otton all having great days. Even Mike Evans, who is now back, coming back and having a really strong day. That being said, the Tampa Bay defense hasn't been particularly strong, which means we could see some. Tampa Bay has allowed the 4th most fantasy points per game to slot receivers, so it could be a good game for Thielen. And I think also even Chuba Hubbard could have this could be a good week since they have been allowing running yards against them. Kind of to summarize there, as we move over to DraftKings to build some lineups, I think the stacks that I kind of want to focus on are that Chargers-Atlanta game with Herbert, McConkey, and London, or the Rams-New Orleans game with maybe Stafford, Kupp, and Valdez-Scantling, or Kamara, though Kamara's kind of pushing it, be kind of betting that he's going to have that week again. And then also the Tampa Bay-Carolina game, leaning into that Mayfield-Irving-Chuba stack. I think for this one, I'm going to go with the Tampa Bay stack. So I said Mayfield, Irving, and Hubbard. So that gives me a quarterback and 2 running backs. So I still need to figure out all my wide receivers, tight end, a flex, a defense, and I got 5150 average remaining per player. And so the other games I really liked were that Chargers-Atlanta game. And I really like in the Tennessee game, Ridley. Ridley's priced at 5,700, but this is a good matchup for him, and I think he could hit a higher ceiling. So I'm going to pick up Ridley, and then I am going to go grab my tight end, which previously I was going to say Hawkinson, but after talking through some of this, I think I'm going to go to Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry is going to be cheaper than Hawkinson and Otton. I really like Otton, but I'm already doing a stack where that doesn't exactly make sense. So I am going to grab Hunter Henry for my tight end. Let's go ahead and grab the defense, because there's not a lot of great cheap options. If I start at the bottom, I don't really want to pick up the Jaguars or the Panthers. I'm expecting a lot of these ones I'm expecting to be a good back and forth and not necessarily lots of interceptions. I think the first one that I come to that I would feel kind of comfortable picking up is going to be the Colts at 2,800, which kind of goes against my need for Hunter Henry to have a good day. But so let's go find our wide receivers now. I have Mayfield, Irving, and Hubbard. I have Mayfield for my quarterback, Irving and Hubbard for my 2 running backs. I've picked up Calvin Ridley for one of my wide receivers, Hunter Henry for my tight end, and the Colts defense. And I have about 6K per player remaining. I really liked that Chargers Atlanta game. So I'm going to grab McConkey, and I'm still about 6K per player because McConkey's at 6,100. So I can either go really high and then a low player. Let's see. I am going to pick up Valdez-Scantling for my wide receiver, which gives me 7,600 for my flex, which gives me a lot of leeway. And actually, because of that, I am going to grab Kupp for my flex, which gives me Baker Mayfield for my quarterback, Bucky Irving for my running back, Chuba Hubbard for one of my running backs, Calvin Ridley for a wide receiver, Ladd McConkey for a wide receiver, Marquez Valdez-Scantling for a wide receiver, Hunter Henry for my tight end, Cooper Kupp for a flex, and the Colts. And I actually still have 200. I think one of my questions was on that tight end spot. Do I like Hunter Henry more than Hawkinson? I think I do, just in this matchup. I like Henry against Indianapolis more than Hawkinson versus Arizona. And so I'm gonna enter that. And that's that. Thanks for tuning in. I hope I've sparked some curiosity or some great ideas as you prepare for this week. We have our free contest up and running. The link is in the description. We would love to have you join us. It's a lot of fun. Can't wait to hear what your thoughts are. Happy football watching.